After decades of birthdays, holidays, coffee dates, and late-night conversations, you wake up one day and realize the friends are gone. Not because of a fight, not because of distance, they just faded. And here's the part no one talks about. You don't miss them. You don't feel the ache you're supposed to feel. You feel relief. Quiet, guilty relief. Like you've been holding your breath for years and someone finally told you it's okay to exhale. But why does this happen after 50? Why do friendships that survived decades suddenly dissolve? Not with drama, but with silence. It's not because you became cold. It's because you finally stopped pretending. You stopped performing the version of yourself that kept those connections alive. And when you stopped acting, they stopped calling, because what they loved wasn't you. It was the performance. There's a psychology behind this that most people spend their entire lives never understanding. A specific way your mind recalibrates connection, energy, and meaning as you age. The German philosopher Schopenhauer understood this deeply when he observed that those with the richest inner lives often find solitude not as exile, but as sanctuary. What if the friends didn't disappear because you failed at connection? What if they disappeared because you finally chose freedom? And what if the relief you feel isn't guilt? It's your soul recognizing, for the first time in decades, that you're finally home. Let me explain what's actually happening here. When friendships dissolve after 50, it's rarely about geography or busy schedules. It's about something far more profound: emotional recalibration. Your mind has spent decades measuring the cost of every interaction, the energy required to show up, to perform interest, to mirror enthusiasm you don't feel. And at some point, quietly, without announcement, your internal accounting system reached a conclusion. The cost is too high. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. People with high internal self-presence, those who've built rich, complex inner worlds, don't need external validation the way others do. Their hearts don't beat faster in crowds. They beat steadier in silence. And after years of forcing themselves into rooms that drained them, their bodies finally said, "Enough." What if this isn't a flaw in your wiring? What if it's a design feature? What if the reason you don't miss those friends isn't because you're broken, but because you've finally stopped breaking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you? The absence of those friendships isn't loss, it's liberation. Your nervous system has been trying to tell you this for years. You just finally started listening. But here's the interesting part. The relief you feel when those friendships fade isn't just about escaping exhaustion. It's about reclaiming something you didn't even know you'd lost: your authentic self. For decades, you performed a version of yourself that was palatable, acceptable, socially appropriate. You laughed at jokes that weren't funny. You attended events you dreaded. You pretended to care about conversations that bored you to tears. And somewhere along the way, you forgot what it felt like to just be. The friendships that dissolved weren't built on who you were. They were built on who you were willing to pretend to be. And when you stopped pretending, there was nothing left to hold them together, because what they loved wasn't you. It was the mask. And masks, no matter how well crafted, eventually become unbearable to wear. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when you tried. You showed up to dinners, answered calls, made plans. You performed the rituals of friendship because that's what you thought you were supposed to do. And maybe, for a while, you even convinced yourself it was working. I remember someone telling me once that the loneliest they'd ever felt was in a room full of people who claimed to know them. They were laughing at the right moments, nodding along, contributing just enough to seem engaged. But inside, they were counting the minutes until they could leave. Not because they hated those people, but because being around them required a version of themselves that didn't exist anymore, if it ever had. And here's what they realized, years later. Those friendships weren't built on who they were. They were built on who they were willing to pretend to be. The moment they stopped pretending, the friendships evaporated, because what those friends loved wasn't them. It was the performance. Their quietness wasn't a flaw, it was a form of honesty. Their need for solitude wasn't rejection, It was self-preservation and the relief they felt when those connections finally dissolved. That wasn't guilt. That was their soul exhaling after decades of holding its breath. Choosing peace over performance is also a way of living. And after years of being told it's wrong, it's time to understand why it's right. Because here's what most people refuse to accept. Some of us are wired differently. We don't recharge in crowds. We recharge in silence. We don't find meaning in constant connection. We find it in deep, deliberate solitude. And after 50, 60, 70 years of trying to be someone we're not, we've finally earned the right to stop apologizing for it. There's a psychology behind this that most people never understand, because it challenges everything society teaches about connection. We're told that friendships are supposed to energize us, that spending time with others should feel good, that isolation is the enemy of happiness. But for people like you, the opposite is true. After decades of trying to enjoy crowded rooms, you've discovered something the world refuses to validate. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's oxygen. And the people who drained you weren't bad people. They just required a version of you that was exhausting to maintain. Schopenhauer saw this clearly when he explored the relationship between sociability and inner richness. He observed that those with the richest inner worlds, deep thinkers, sensitive souls, people who live more in their minds than in the external world, often find socializing unbearable. Not because they lack social skills, but because their internal complexity makes shallow interaction feel like a chore. Every conversation that stays on the surface, every forced smile, every performance of interest in topics that don't matter. It's work, unpaid, unrecognized, soul-draining work. And after 50, 60, 70 years of that work, you finally gave yourself permission to stop. The friends who disappeared, they weren't compatible with the real you. They were compatible with the performance. And when the performance ended, so did they. History's greatest thinkers understood this. Rilke wrote about the necessity of solitude for the soul to grow. Thoreau built a life around it. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the masks you wear for others. And every single one of them was called strange, cold, antisocial. Because the world doesn't know what to do with people who choose depth over breadth, peace over popularity, sanctuary over socializing. The world celebrates extroversion as if it's the only valid way to exist. It glorifies busyness, constant connection, social calendars packed to the brim. But what about those of us who find our greatest clarity in stillness? What about those of us who've discovered that our most profound thoughts emerge not in conversation, but in silence? What about those of us who've learned, after decades of trying, that we simply function better alone? Still, here's a curiosity. If this relief is so natural, so psychologically sound, why does it come with guilt? The guilt you feel when friendships fade isn't about the friendships themselves. It's about the story society tells you. That you should want connection, that you should feel sad when people leave, that choosing solitude over socializing makes you defective. But what are you really protecting yourself from? Let me break it down. First, you're protecting your energy. Socializing, for you, isn't recharging. It's depleting. Every interaction requires you to manage not just your own emotions, but everyone else's. You're reading the room, adjusting your tone, performing interest, mirroring energy you don't feel. And by the time you get home, you're not just tired, you're drained, exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix, because it's not physical tiredness, it's emotional depletion. Second, you're protecting yourself from performance. Those friendships required you to act, to be more enthusiastic than you felt, to care about things you didn't care about, to show up when you wanted to stay home. And over time, that performance became a second job, one you didn't get paid for, one that didn't even feel good. It just felt necessary. Until one day, it didn't anymore. Third, you're protecting your peace. Because here's a secret, you rarely say out loud. You're happier alone, not lonely, not isolated, just alone, in the quiet of your own home, with your own thoughts, your own rhythms, your own company. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be anything other than exactly who you are. And that feels like freedom. Your dog doesn't judge your silence. Your cat doesn't drain your energy. The stillness of your home doesn't ask you to be more than you are. And after decades of relationships that required constant performance, that stillness feels like sanctuary. Fourth, you're protecting your time. At this stage of life, you've learned something younger people haven't yet grasped. Time is finite. Every hour spent in a conversation that doesn't nourish you is an hour you'll never get back. Every dinner party that drains you is time stolen from the activities that actually bring you peace. And you've decided, finally, that your time is too precious to waste on connections that don't add to your life. If you are someone who feels relief when friendships fade, if you've spent years believing there's something wrong with you for preferring your own company, you're not alone. This journey of choosing peace over performance is happening quietly, all over the world, right now. After years of trying to fit in, millions of people like you are finally choosing themselves. Before we go deeper into what this means for your life, take a moment to join this quiet corner of the internet, a space for people who've spent decades feeling different and are finally finding their peace. And if this resonates with you, share in the comments what part of this journey touched you most deeply. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You're not alone in feeling this way. Let's continue, because what comes next might be the very thing you've been carrying in silence for years. Let me shift for a moment and speak directly to you. Not about you, to you. What if nothing is wrong? What if the reason you don't miss those friends isn't because you're broken, but because you finally stopped breaking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you? I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly, and I'd wonder, why don't I want that? Why does the idea of a dinner party feel like work instead of fun? Why do I feel more alive in the silence of my own home than in a room full of people who claim to care about me? And then I realized I wasn't broken. I was just built differently. My energy doesn't recharge in crowds. It recharges in solitude. My clarity doesn't come from conversation. It comes from stillness. My peace doesn't require other people. It requires their absence. Schopenhauer called this the inverse relationship between sociability and inner richness. The more complex your internal world, the less you need external validation. The deeper your thoughts, the shallower most conversations feel. And the more sensitive you are, the more draining it becomes to exist in spaces that don't honor that sensitivity. At 50, 60, 70 years old, you've earned the right to choose peace. You've spent decades performing. You've tried to fit in. You've forced yourself into friendships that required you to be someone you're not. And now, finally, you've stopped. Not because you gave up on connection, but because you chose freedom. The world will tell you that you're missing out, that you're isolating yourself, that you'll regret this choice when you're older and truly alone. But here's what the world doesn't understand. You're not running away from connection. You're running toward peace. You're not avoiding life. You're finally living it on your own terms. And now, it's time to talk directly to you about what that freedom actually means. Maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you've spent years believing that your preference for solitude was a flaw, a failure, a sign that something was deeply wrong with you. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to realize that it's not. It doesn't mean you never get lonely. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness is imposed. Solitude is oxygen. Loneliness is suffocation. Solitude is the joy of your own company. Loneliness is the ache of unwanted isolation. You can be alone and not lonely. You can be in a crowd and feel profoundly lonely. The difference isn't the number of people around you. It's whether you're choosing the space you're in or enduring it. And here's what the world refuses to understand. Choosing solitude doesn't make you antisocial. It makes you intentional. It means you've stopped wasting your limited energy on connections that don't nourish you. It means you've stopped performing for people who only loved the mask, not the face beneath it. While others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out, the joy of a quiet Saturday night at home, the joy of not having to explain yourself, the joy of being in your own sanctuary, surrounded by your own peace, living in your own rhythm. That's not failure, that's freedom. Rest isn't laziness, stillness isn't stagnation, quiet isn't emptiness. These are the lies society tells to keep you performing, to keep you productive, to keep you engaged in a world that profits from your exhaustion. But you've learned the truth. Rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity. Quiet is part of depth. There is something important still waiting to be said, something about why this matters more than you think. Let's go deeper into the psychology, because there are specific reasons why people like you find peace in solitude, and understanding them changes everything. First, it's about energy management. Your nervous system processes social interaction differently. For extroverts, being around people is energizing. For you, it's depleting. Every conversation, every social cue, every moment of eye contact requires energy. And after decades of spending that energy on people who didn't replenish it, your body learned to protect itself. It started craving solitude the way others crave connection, not because you're antisocial, because you're self-preserving. Second, it's about trust and vulnerability. Jung talked about the persona, the mask we wear in public. For most people, the persona is a light costume. For you, it's armor. Because you've learned, over years of experience, that showing your true self often leads to misunderstanding, judgment, or rejection. So you perform. You act the part. You give people the version of you they can handle. And it's exhausting. The friendships that faded, they were built on the persona, not the self. And when you stopped performing, they had nothing left to hold on to. Third, it's about your complex inner life. Rilke wrote that the only journey is the one within. And for people like you, that inner journey is rich, deep, and endlessly absorbing. You don't need constant external stimulation because your internal world is complete. You think deeply. You feel deeply. You process the world in layers most people never see. And that depth makes shallow interaction unbearable. It's not that you don't want connection. It's that you want connection that matches your depth. And most people can't offer that. Fourth, it's about control over your environment. Your home is your sanctuary. It's the one place where you don't have to perform, explain, or adjust. It's where you can breathe. And after a lifetime of performing socially, that sanctuary becomes sacred. The friends who disappeared, they were asking you to leave your sanctuary and enter their chaos. And you finally said, no. Fifth, it's about the wisdom that comes with age. At 50, 60, 70, you've lived long enough to know what matters and what doesn't. You've attended enough meaningless gatherings to recognize them for what they are. You've had enough surface-level conversations to know they don't feed your soul. And you've finally given yourself permission to stop participating in things that don't serve you. That's not bitterness. That's wisdom. Sometimes the reason you love being alone is because the world once disappointed you. And protecting your peace isn't bitterness. It's emotional wisdom. It's the recognition that not all connection is valuable, that not all relationships deserve your energy, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to choose solitude over performance. Picture this. You're standing at your window, watching life continue outside. People rushing, talking, laughing, moving from one thing to the next. And you're inside, still, quiet, at peace. Society glorifies busyness as if rest is laziness. It glorifies socializing as if solitude is failure. But you've learned something they haven't. Rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity, and solitude is part of freedom. Your cat curled beside you understands more than most people ever will. It doesn't ask you to be more than you are. It doesn't drain your energy. It doesn't judge your silence. It just exists with you, in peace. And that peace is worth more than 100 shallow friendships. This isn't about rejecting the world. It's about choosing yourself. It's about recognizing that self-companionship is a skill, a gift, a form of love, and you've mastered it. You've learned to enjoy your own thoughts, to find comfort in your own presence, to create a life that doesn't require constant external validation. That's not loneliness. That's sovereignty. You are not strange for preferring your own company. You are not broken for feeling relief when friendships fade. You are not cold for choosing peace over performance. You are not failing at connection. You are succeeding at self-preservation. You are not missing out on life. You are living it on your own terms. You are not alone in a sad way. You are alone in a powerful way. You are building a life that doesn't exhaust you, a life that doesn't require you to perform, a life where your energy is yours to keep, your peace is yours to protect, and your solitude is yours to cherish. And one day, maybe years from now, you will reach out to someone, not because you're forced to, not because society says you should, but because you choose to, because you found someone who doesn't require the performance, someone who sees the real you and doesn't ask you to change. And that connection will feel different because it won't cost you your peace. It will add to it. Until then, you have everything you need: your sanctuary, your clarity, your freedom, and the quiet, powerful knowledge that you've finally stopped apologizing for who you are. If this resonates with you, if you want to go even deeper into understanding the psychology of those who choose solitude over shallow connection, there's more waiting for you here. Another conversation, another layer, just for you. This is Alone Together, a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. If you're here, you're not broken. You're just built differently. And you're not alone in being alone.